is that in producing a pattern book, we stifle innovation and local distinctiveness. So that would be my worry. I don't think there's anything wrong with the principle of elevating design and getting it to a position where, at the moment, design, you have to have regard to advice, or having regard to advice is a little bit wishy-washy. And if we can get to a position where design becomes more important in the decision-making process, that must be a good thing. But what's being proposed here, I think, has got some fairly significant sort of risks attached to it. There are 3 things down the bottom here. I'll just quickly cover. Some sort of fast-track approach to beauty. This is the idea that if your development is beautiful, you'll get a quick planning permission. I think we should resist that. As I say, the appearance of something should not determine whether it gets planning consent or not. There are a much broader set of considerations that need to be taken into account. So the idea that if you produce something which looks nice, you may not even need planning permission, and if you did, you get a quicker decision, I think is fundamentally sort of flawed. As an eye-catching, let's have every new street lined with trees. I understand that, it's linked to the climate change agenda. I don't think there's a single tree-lined street in somewhere like Blakeney, but it's an exceptionally nice place. So the idea that there's a one-size-fits-all sort of solution to these things, and that every street should be lined with trees, I think is very, very simplistic. I'll be surprised if that survives the sort of consultation process. And then finally, the idea that we should have a chief officer of design and placemaking in every authority. Of course, there's nothing wrong with having dedicated expertise on these things, whether it needs to be a chief officer level or whatever, is up for debate. And of course, there are resource implications there. If this is an entirely new position that doesn't currently exist, rather than an addition to somebody's job description, then it's got significant resource implications, and you'd need to have clarity around sort of role. So that's a quick canter through. I'm going to shut up and see if there's any questions. I think this is probably one of the lesser sort of controversial areas, other than in those concerns I've expressed about practical implementation. I think everybody would agree that if we can push the design agenda and give local authorities, more strength, that's got to be a good thing. But it's how they're going about it which raises concerns. So we'll stop there.
I think
any raised hands.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay, there you go.
I think Mark, the devil, as always, will be in the detail. On the surface, it looks fine, but it's when we start burrowing down, when the actual bill gets published, that we'll find what horrors are actually hidden beneath. So we can watch this space, really.
Yeah, I think it raises I think it raises a sort of common theme throughout all of these things, the degree to which government appears to want to centralise processes, and how that might impinge on, let's call it local democracy, public engagement in the process. And there is a risk that the more that these things are centralised, the less local levers we're going to have. So as you say, Paul, it's in the detail of quite how would it work? What's the relationship between national guidance and local guidance, which will take precedence? Who will the decision maker be on what looks beautiful? Will it be me, you, or somebody else? How will we resolve, arguments between parties about what's beautiful and what's not beautiful? So feels good, but as you say, the practical implementation raises all sorts of questions.
Mark, I had, I think, possibly Andrew up next, and I can see Nigel has his hand up as well. Nigel Pierce, I should say. Andrew, can we take you first, please?
Yeah, thank you, Phil, and morning, everybody. This beautification process, it seems like a sort of a proliferation of the paragraph 79 schemes, which have got to be exceptional design or innovative. It seems that the government want to, as it were, trickle down that principle to the greater community with this plan of beautifying planning applications and development. But the paragraph 79E schemes are not fast-tracked, are they? Why should these schemes in the white paper or moving forward be fast-tracked when the National Planning Policy Framework with paragraph 79E schemes, which the like of which we saw recently at Egmere, they're not fast-tracked, are they? Are they going to be fast-tracked as well in the future, or do we not know?
If you want to go first, Mark, I've got some thoughts on that, but by all means, if you'd like to lead.
Well, I think you raised a really critical point. I mean, one thing, let's go for beautiful buildings, let's enhance design, but why is that linked to speed of decision? And the point I made previously as well, you can have the best looking building that we would all think was a fantastic piece of architecture and be wonderful, but it entirely unacceptable in lots of other perfectly legitimate ways. No car parking, appalling access considerations, really bad impact on the next door neighbour. All the things that we wrestle with through the planning committee, which lead to well-rounded decisions. Why are we focusing or being asked to focus on one single aspect and fast track those things through? The default position may be that they don't even require a planning application in the true sense of the word. So I just think that aspect of what's being proposed is a step too far. And if it's a really good proposal and it's really beautiful, well, we'll give it permission quickly anyway. So, what's the target here? Those schemes which are uncontroversial, which are good, which tick all the boxes, they should, and do in the main, sail through the planning process relatively quickly. It's the controversial minority that take the time, and they take the time for good reason. So I think this whole raft of proposals to deregulate and remove planning control and permitted development rights in the interests of speed of decision misses the target. We should be focused on the quality of the decision and what we're delivering, not how long it takes. No, there might well be levers to pull to increase speed, but let's not compromise quality in the process. I mean, that's the key message, really. And let's not compromise the ability of communities to get involved in that decision-making process by disengaging, not giving them the opportunity to make comments. Anyway,
I had a point to that.
And Philip, I just wanted to ask you, are you concerned about the resources for this? Because it's effectively removing the discretion to outsource this specialist advice from a design and place officer. We've got to have it in-house, I understand. It's going to be like a statutory appointment. And we all know that resources have been cut by as much as 50% in areas over the last 10 years. And I asked myself, has this been put through the sieve by the government? And is the funding going to be given to us to recruit somebody of this seniority?
Okay, well, I think if you look at the national picture, I can tell you that there is already a move to appoint to that national board. So the part that's asking questions about the national board, they've already got chap lined up for it. So that seems to be happening. At a local level, obviously, we do have a design guide. We've got a design guide which has been amended, consulted on, and which we will move forward. So that design guide in itself should give that strong local vernacular and character that is absolutely essential for our wider area. Sorry, Georgie, I can see you out the corner of my eye there. I'll catch up in a minute. And so from that point of view, I think we're probably well placed as an organisation with the expertise within the team to be able to drive good design forward. In fact, we've been doing that for a number of years with your help, members, and we have got a strong design ethic within our planning service. So that is good news, I think, for North Norfolk. The concern that I have is, as Mark has outlined in this discussion, I'm no fan of pattern book architecture. I'm no fan of draconian design guides that say there is only one way to develop. There is only one way that this can work within a country. never mind a district. So that does not sit easily with me. And that's something that I've heard for council members were very concerned about. And certainly that's something that I would like to see within our response, that we need to respect that local diversity. We support good design, but good design is about far more than an attractive building. It's about the space around the buildings. It's about the way they interconnect. And good design is actually about many different levels of consideration in planning. So those are my initial thoughts on that second pillar. Nigel, I think you were in next. Nigel Pierce. I can see you, Nigel Dixon. I'll be with you shortly.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just looking at this and this centralisation, I mean, one of our core aspects is to protect our heritage. We have a lot of planning applications where we, after stipulation, consultation and conversation, you know, you have to put a building in that matches the surrounding locality, the history, types of materials, etc. Now, in our area, we're probably one, if not the most major local authorities to have that situation, because we are one of the most sparsely populated areas in the country, and we do have a lot of traditional type housing and buildings. Is this going to restrict us that way? Because I'm not a fan of centralisation. And you look around our authority area, we have houses of many different shapes and sizes, from old to new and modern. Some don't fit in with each other, but some do. I'm not going back over past planning situations and decisions, but what I'm saying is, for the future, do you think, or is it a possibility that we are being prevented, or to be tried to be prevented, from applying our local history, protection of the environment that we've done so well in the past?
So I don't think so, Nigel. There are some specific provisions in the white paper around how we might deal with proposals relating to listed buildings and conservation areas in the future. Those proposals are mainly about the sort of decision-making process. They won't alter, as far as I can see, the sort of statutory requirements to sort of preserve and enhance and the tests that you would apply to schemes. So there's a slightly concerning proposition that listed building applications might not cross the desk of the local authority planning officer in the future. They might go down a route of self-certifying via some other process. A bit like at the moment, you can self-certify under the building regulations if you comply with a set of standards. That provision seems to be floated in the white paper in relation to listed building proposals, which I think would be very regrettable in many ways. But I don't think there's a wider concern that our powers are going to be reduced substantially in relation to how we look after heritage assets more broadly and the impact of proposals on conservation areas. Those are statutory requirements, so they're not covered in the white paper, and that they would remain. So I don't think that's a major concern.
Well, I would agree, Mark. Could we take George, you next, please? Thank you.
Hi, I just wondered what the implication was for neighbourhood plans.
Okay. So there's some warm words in the white paper about retaining neighbourhood plans as they currently exist, and I don't perceive any rowing back on that from government. Government thinks the neighbourhood plan regime has been a successful one. We have very few locally, but they're beginning to trickle through now. I didn't see anything in the white paper that led me to think we were going to get a complete about turn and neighbourhood plans were going to disappear. If anything, I think government is reinforcing their role moving forward. So I'm not too concerned about that.
Okay, great. Nigel Dixon, please.
Yes, thanks for that. I have no problem with something which fast tracks major applications through the system. I certainly have a problem with the term beautification. It is an extremely subjective term, and it means all things to all people in various shades. I have a suggestion though, and that is, for me, anything which comes forward as compliant rather than beautiful. So if it's compliant and you can dimensionalize compliance by saying, if it complies with the local plan, if it complies with the supplementary planning documents, if it complies with the kind of expectations we have locally for placemaking, sustainability, functionality, all of those sort of things, if it ticks all those boxes and you can determine the number of boxes that you want to reach that standard of compliance, then I have no difficulty at all with a system that allows an application to go through relatively, well, let's put it this way, quickly, far more quickly than we are currently able to do. I really think we do have to challenge that beautification statement very robustly. And I think it's helpful if you can put something in and say, instead of that, what about this? And try to move the argument down that route rather than just simply a challenge and say we don't like it. I think we need to be proactive as well as challenging.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Nigel. Just one remark on that. Said application that meets all those boxes and ticks all of those boxes and is policy compliant, I bet, no, I don't have the analysis, I bet the vast majority of them are processed very, very quickly anyway. So the sort of value of inventing yet another approach on the notion that it would radically speed up decision making and make a great deal of difference, I think might well be flawed, because as I say, the vast majority of those proposals which are uncontroversial, you know, we deal with them under delegated powers. We've got extensive delegated powers with the authority, and our performance figures there stand up to scrutiny. We deal with things pretty quickly. So it's a sort of inventing an entirely new process to streamline a system that, when it operates effectively, is already quite streamlined. Yeah, but there may be some value in it.
Could we just legitimise that though? I mean, I don't disagree with what you say, Mark, but yeah. Could we just say, well, yes, that's what we do currently, and almost legitimise it, almost kind of say, yeah, well, that's just reinforcing what we currently do. Let's give it a label if that's what you want, but let's not play about with it.
Yeah.
I think it's very easy to say that things should move forward more quickly, members. We don't have a definition anywhere in this paper about what more quickly actually means. And I think one of the things I would point to is there are an awful lot of proposals in this paper. There are fewer questions. For instance, there's a proposal 15 that talks about climate change. It covers 2 paragraphs. Climate change is far more important than that, and it's far more diverse than that. And I would have hoped that the white paper would have dealt with climate change in a more root and branch element. Certainly that's a really significant concern that I have, that it only features very limitedly within this design section. And that also goes for the environment and ecology. That features again for a couple of paragraphs at proposal 16. I think there are elements that the white paper should rightfully look at and consider. And these are not all about speed. They're about delivering quality with that speed. So for me, that's when we make good planning decisions that are timely, that deliver that quality. Liz, you've been very patient with your hand up, a blue hand at that as well, so thank you.
Thank you, Philip. I just want to take you back to when you were talking about this national board, and that's obviously coming on board. And I wonder, the fact that we've got our local design guide and we're obviously working on that level and the way government are looking for things, I don't know whether you can answer this. Is that, do you think, happening sort of across the majority of the country, or is it this come about because there's pockets of where it's happening but not on a sort of national level?
Mark, would you like to come back?
I nodded my head as if I knew the answer, but I don't. Yeah, it said that North Norfolk has been a sort of leader on design guides. We were one of the early adopters. We've had one now for years and years and years. There are similar examples of documents in most of the Norfolk authorities I work with, and I would imagine they're fairly commonplace, to be honest with you. So whether this is government trying to fill a void that doesn't actually exist is a good question. You know, what's the purpose of a set of national standards if we've got good coverage on local ones? And I think for us, we have got a very good design guide. My wish would be that it would get more prominence and more teeth than it's currently got, and that seems to be what's being talked about here. That, you know, locally produced guides produced through public consultation will effectively sit alongside the local plan and have a little bit more force behind them than they currently do.
I think it's the national level that's worrying our members, Mark, and that uniformity that we need to reflect back in our comments that we'll agree with portfolio holder and leader on this paper. I think that's something that to me is a serious concern. And, you know, a national guide for design, championing design is a good thing. We're going to have a director of place and climate change. So again, you know, there's an element where that specialism could sit within an individual professional as the lead on the officer side. It may be that we look at having a design champion. Those are all options we can take forward. But, you know, I'm going to say, Liz, I think I'm first concerned about what we do well at North Norfolk and ensuring that that is something that we speak loudly on in the white paper and that we seek for the government to support those things that we do well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I'm saying. I think my feeling is that if this isn't happening across the country, then it should be happening. And we should be, as part of our response, saying rather than just going for a standardised national approach, this is working well with local design guides. And, you know, we would like to see this put across as good practice within for what local authorities should be looking to achieve. Goes back to what Nigel was saying about coming up with a solution as well, doesn't it? Rather than just saying, no, we don't want that.
Very much so, very much so. I'm going to close this section on design, perhaps with maybe only one or two more questions. I can see that Andrew has his hand up. Is there anyone who's not spoken or asked a query yet that I've missed? Okay, on that basis, Andrew, if you would like to have the last say, the last question on this section.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. It's just to follow on from what Liz was saying. I think the whole ethos of a standardised design guide would be better implemented if the government set up, say, like an Ofsted system, so that not every local authority had to have a design consultant, but they could receive advice centrally on how the local design guides that we produce could be improved. And it would also, you know, flag up those areas, those local authorities that were sort of falling behind on standards. So I think this is a too broad brush approach from the government. It would be better if they had like a standards officer who could come in and work with local authorities on an itinerant basis, and that would be the way to move forward, I think.
Interesting idea. Thank you, Andrew, and we'll reflect on that. Nigel, one more, and then we'll move on. Thank you. I know a lot of members need to.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I do have some concern about the kind of Ofsted model. I much prefer, I have to say, our current approach with regard to local plans and working with the planning inspectorate to get those approved and become the standard for our particular district. And I rather think that system is one that I would want to support for the future, because it does allow all of those points, that whole spectrum of considerations that should be taken into account by the inspector when the local plan is put forward, together with all the supplementary planning documents, which includes the kind of points that you've made already regarding climate change and other things that sit right alongside that. If they are included in that, and if every, let's say every 15 years, when the local plans come up for that kind of examination, very detailed examination, I think that I can't see where the problem is with that. I think that if that works as it is meant to, then that will deliver what we need, both nationally and locally.
Thank you. I'll take that as our last comment. Other than reflecting on Virginia's praise for Paul Rhymes, I agree. It's an excellent new design guide that we have, and Paul was very much thanked on that before he left us. I think he's left good ground behind him there for us to then pick up. Okay, Mark, the third pillar, please.
Okay, so this is pillar 3. This is about infrastructure provision and section 106 agreements. So I've reread this section about 5 or 6 times, and to be honest, I'm a little bit bamboozled about what is being proposed here. I can't actually work out what the government proposals are. It's not helped by the fact that they sort of present 2 or 3 sort of alternatives and sort of seek commentary on alternatives, each of which doesn't appear to be particularly well worked through and considered, to be honest with you. So it's with that sort of caveat, I'll try and describe what I think is being proposed here. So at the moment, the principal mechanism for delivering supporting infrastructure when development proposals come forward in North Norfolk is via section 106 legal agreements. So this is where, in exchange for granting planning permission, the developer obligates themselves to provide various facilities through signing a legal agreement. The alternative, which some authorities do, is a community infrastructure levy, where essentially it's broadly the same sort of principle, but rather than developers providing facilities, they pay a sum of money through the payment of a community infrastructure levy, and that sum of money is then used by the authority to fund the infrastructure to support development. Authorities have options at the moment. They can either stick with the section 106 process as we've done, or they can go down the route of charging a community infrastructure levy. What they can't do is both. It's sort of one or the other. So we're a section 106 authority, as are about half the councils in the country. The proposals would appear to be to scrap section 106 processes entirely, scrap the community infrastructure levy process entirely, and introduce something called an infrastructure levy, i.e. drop the word community infrastructure and just call it an infrastructure levy. Same sort of principles would apply. The developer would be required to pay a sum of money related to the finished value of their development scheme. So somebody would have to work out what the scheme was worth, and then they would be charged a percentage flat rate levy fee based on how much their development was worth. Local authorities would collect that money, and local authorities would spend that money, same way as we do under the section 106 process. Now, the big risks and the reasons why North Norfolk in the past has not been attracted to community infrastructure levy type proposals is the potential impacts on affordable housing delivery. Because tariff payments of whatever description, whether it's a community infrastructure levy or a national infrastructure levy, are taken out of the value of land or the value of the development, the fear is that developers would plead poverty and reduce the amount of affordable housing that they're able to offer on these schemes, because they've got to pay this wider community infrastructure levy first. It's not negotiable, it can't be waived, it's a flat rate tariff. So what else can the developer do? It can either negotiate on land value and try and get the land cheaper, it can cut its costs and build poorer quality development, or it can plead with the local authority to waive some of its policy requirements to ensure that it can maintain its profit margins. So that was the concern around any levy type approach, that it may well bite on affordable housing provision. I'm not entirely sure whether the proposals in the white paper offer any protection in that regard. The sort of confused messages around affordable housing provision can be used to offset the levy. which sort of implies that if you provide affordable housing, you don't have to do much about any other type of infrastructure, as if it's a sort of choice, so you're one or the other. And in my world, affordable housing and other infrastructure are both required. It's not a decision about can we have one or can we have the other, that they should sit alongside each other. So for me, I think there's significant value locally in having the options we've currently got. I'm not saying a tariff payment will never work, but I think we should be given the room to decide locally whether a tariff style system would suit us, something which would be attractive to us and deliver more benefit, or whether the current 106 process, whether it's adapted or improved from where we are, is actually better for us locally. And again, we should resist this notion that we have something imposed centrally, one size sort of fits all sort of approach, because those sort of approaches are usually come with some unforeseen consequences and things that, we perhaps didn't think about at the time. So personally, I'm not attracted to a sort of centralized national tariff collected. I think the other issue with tariff payments and anything which involves, let's describe it as grubby money, creates the impression amongst our communities that the council's taking, they think we're taking wheelbarrows full of money. And we've got a great big war chest, which we're then going to spend on our own local priorities. And that is a clear risk that, people will think we're granting planning permission because of the tariff that we're receiving. A further risk is, how do you spend it? If you were to collect significant sums of money via a tariff, you've then got to decide how you're going to spend it. And that introduces sort of local priorities and competition. Our doomsday scenario here, let's scare the North Walsham members to death. Lots of development in North Walsham, lots of tariff receipts come in from the North Walsham development. The council's got lots of money. It decides in its wisdom that coastal sea defences are a key priority and spends that money in Haysborough or Walcott or Cromer or somewhere else out with North Walsham, denying North Walsham area the key infrastructure which that funding is supposed to be for. Now, of course, we can resolve those risks by ring fencing how we spend money and ensuring that it does get spent locally from where it is derived from. But it does create additional sort of reputational risks around how the council collects and distributes and spends that sort of money. One of the benefits of the current 106 process is 106 obligations are linked to the specific development proposal and the place that they are in. So developments in Holt deliver infrastructure improvements in Holt, which are necessary to make that particular development proposal acceptable. And that link to me is one which should be retained. We shouldn't sever the link between the development and the wider benefits that it can deliver. One particular thing I noticed in the consultation paper, the suggestion councils might want to use levy receipts to offset council tax bills. I think that is a move too far. I mean, it seems to me entirely unrelated to development, and the notion that councils might want to collect money from development in order to offset their wider council tax bills just feels entirely wrong as a matter of principle. So that's me done. We'll open up to questions. It's quite
Can you take the shared screen away if you would?
Yeah, just get rid of it. Yeah.
I'm struggling to see hands and questions. I'm going to go with who's on my grid first, and that would be Eric first, please.
Good morning. Yes, I mean, I share all your concerns about this infrastructure levy, Mark. My experience now, I think, of dealing with planning goes back something like 30 years in different authorities and at different levels. And the simple reality is that with a small p, the politics of all of this is that if developers pay levies and it's not linked to an area, those areas can easily miss out. I mean, that's just the reality. Now, politicians will always say, oh, no, that's not what we're doing. But look, politicians look after their areas, and that's just a hard reality. And once you disconnect infrastructure funds from the locality where the development is taking place, you're, to me, going down a very rocky road. I understand why governments, would like a more strategic approach, but you're dealing with the small p here, local politics, and that's not quite how the system works. So I would support what you're actually saying. I think we should keep the Section 106. We've always been against SIL monies using that system, which was brought in by the coalition government, if my memory is correct, for the simple reason that it's not tied to an area, and those areas could easily miss out. And I know what you say about the North Walsham example. I just have to say, if infrastructure money is not tied to North Walsham, it might not actually be spent there. That's the harsh reality we have to deal with. Whatever councillors might say and how they might plead, that's actually what happens in practice. So I support what you're saying, and I think we need to resist this, that it's got to be tied to the area where the development is. And quite frankly, that's what residents and the communities where you are expect. If there's a significant planning development in an area and there's infrastructure implications, they expect to see in practice and in a very practical visual way, some practical compensation for that, be it better libraries, new schools, roads, etc. So that's just my comment.
There is a section in the white paper that says exactly that, Eric, but I think there's no harm whatsoever in firmly underpinning that that's the way that we see infrastructure and development working hand in hand. Mark, is there anything that you would like to respond? Okay, I've got John. I think I had Paul Heinrich. I've got Nigel Dixon and then Andrew Brown. So if John, I come to you next. You're on mute at the moment, John.
Thank you, Philip. Morning, everybody. I keep getting indications that it says my internet is unstable, so if you lose me, I apologise. Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I have some concerns around where it says we can raise money against potential income in the future, which is an unknown level of income. But I was also fortunate to get a last-minute place on a LGA white paper workshop, and that had a Dr. Michael Bingham, OBE, who is the interim chief planner, there for a question and answer session. And one of his little sayings was, we haven't quite worked that up yet. And he actually said in there that the 106 agreement is not dead. So whilst I agree with Mark's, reading of what's written in the white paper, is absolutely right. When you actually talk to them, so if we can strongly write within the suggestive way that people are saying, I think we've got an opportunity to keep the 106 in there. And that was a general feeling I got from many people that were in that meeting. So yeah, all I'm saying really is there is hope for us to actually get our point across, I think. Thank you.
That's very good to hear, John. And I think part of our response might be about how we can make Section 106 better. The haggling over viability is a real concern. That takes an enormous amount of time. It disappoints communities, and that surety around housing, affordable housing delivery of infrastructure is critical. So if that could be struck out, if we can get clarity around what we're looking for in Section 106 process, then I think there's still hope for it. And I think it's served the development industry and communities reasonably well for a number of years. So certainly that would be my submission, my recommendation, I think.
I agree. Thank you, Philip.
Okay, and Paul, I think you're up next.
Oh, thank you, Philip. Yeah, I think my concern is the complete lack of clarity there on anything to do with affordable housing. 106 agreements traded off against affordable housing is concerning. I'm hearing through some press reports that it's likely that developments under about 50 houses won't have any obligation to provide affordable housing. In our area, in North Walsham in particular, there is a huge demand for affordable rented housing, which is not being met. It hasn't been met by recent developments. I have grave concerns it won't be met by the Western Extension. Is there anything you can see in that white paper that gives us hope on affordable housing? I'm concerned at the moment, I really am.
Well, I can see Mark shaking his head. It's all promises of jam tomorrow, guys. That's what you're looking at. They tell us that affordables are really important to them. And then I read within the paper that there are other considerations. The very first question is a matter of prioritisation, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah.
Here you go.
I mean, it tells you everything you need to know. Question one is, what's your most important priority? Is it affordable housing? Is it design? Is it infrastructure? Is it something else? I never thought those things were tradable. They're all inherently required to make development proposals acceptable.
That's what we've been.
First question, the first question that asks you to choose between those things, it tells you everything you need to know, really. That government's thinking on this is there is a choice to be made, and okay, in the real world we have to make choices, but let's make these choices locally, not nationally. Let's have the decisions here rather than through a bit of guidance. That's the story, really.
Local decisions, local democracy.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Okay, Nigel, please, Nigel Dixon.
Yes, thank you. I think the bottom line is, for me, is quite simple. For as long as we've got a national policy that says that if you want to deliver affordable housing, or if you want to deliver off-site infrastructure, then the only way of doing that is through housing development. Then you're not going to solve these problems. Doesn't matter what you call the levy, doesn't matter what you label it, it is fundamental that you can only extract so much value out of a piece of land in the way that development works. We're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about infrastructure. Maybe some people might call employment land infrastructure as well, but sitting right alongside what I call infrastructure are employment land opportunities. And so we're not mentioning that, and I think we do have to. If we're looking to build sustainable communities which have got housing of the different types that we require, jobs, and the necessary infrastructure, then we have to do that in a holistic way. Currently, we don't have any other opportunities to bring those forward other than through development. And that means that we inevitably have to have those trade-off arguments, those compromises about what you can and can't achieve on each individual site. And that is the top and the bottom of the situation. And until that change, you will not solve this conundrum.
Thank you, Nigel. Any return comment, Andrew? Mark?
I didn't actually hear a question there from Nigel, I don't think. It is the basic problem is, as he says, there's only a certain amount of value in development land, and there's only a limited amount that you can squeeze out of that value to deliver wider benefits. I think the broader point that I would make is the way that value is split between the landowner, the developer, and the local authority is currently unfair, and it does a disservice to communities where you've got a system where the landowner can essentially recover whatever value he can get for his land. The developer can protect his profit margin at his 20 or 25%. And routinely, the party that has to make all the compromises is the public through the planning obligations bit of the equation. And I think some rebalancing of that. And I think, to be fair to government, the white paper recognises that, and it talks about trying to get more out of that uplift. The sooner that happens, the better. But you do get back to the basic point that delivering infrastructure can't just solely depend on development value. there has to be other funding mechanisms and other ways of delivering these things, because it's a limited pot and you can't go back to the same well time and time and time again. It just doesn't work.
I think
the other risk would be, of course, if you start charging these tariffs and trying to get more infrastructure, all those costs will be passed on to the end consumer in inflated house prices. You know, the price will go up to compensate for the fact that the developer's got to pay for more out of that limited pot. And that will, you know, adversely affect local affordability and so on. So it's got to be very carefully thought through.
I agree. Andrew, you were next in line, and then we've got Eric coming back with a supplementary. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. Well, I think you covered the point, actually, Philip, that I was going to make, that if we get some benefit out of the changes proposed, whereby viability scrapping between parties is eliminated, it's so resource intensive and introduces so much uncertainty into the planning process, then there would be some good coming out of these proposals. But look, this is basically a backdoor tax. You know, the infrastructure, the new infrastructure levy is going to be set nationally. It's not clear whether there will be local variations, as I understand it. I may be wrong on that. But we need to, I think, push back quite strongly that an alteration to Section 106s, which makes arguments over viability more difficult and developers getting off the hook from their initial commitments, is something that we would really welcome. But, you know, I don't think we need to scrap Section 106s to achieve a better system, would be my take on it. Thanks a lot.
Diversity in that offer. Eric, your comments, please.
Yeah, I listened with interest to what Nigel Dixon said. I've just read the papers, which we've got a meeting this afternoon on the proposed housing development on the western side of North Walsham for 2,000 houses. When you look at the estimated costs of providing the infrastructure, there is absolutely no way that any developer could afford those costs, which on their own. So Nigel is right. For when you've got major development, there has to be another funding mechanism for infrastructure, which is outside what developers have to provide.
I wholeheartedly agree, Eric. Over at the Trinity site at Fakenham, we've got a contribution coming forward for about £500,000 in terms of infrastructure funding for a roundabout there, and we're going to be seeking more money to come forward. I have worked at SIL authorities in the past, and the introduction of SIL was always brought forward on the basis that it would not pay for all of the infrastructure requirements. It will pay for around about classically half to around about 2/3 of most infrastructure costs. So there is always a cost with development, and the builders are not paying for all of the new schools, all of the new roads, and all of the infrastructure that we require in our district. That is still funded by government. It's funded by other avenues as well. It's not all coming from a development proposal. Okay, so that's our discussion on the matter of the potential national levy and our discussion about infrastructure. There is a section at the end of this document, you'll be very pleased to hear, members, that talks about how this will all be delivered. I'm just going to speak to you quickly on this and run through some headline considerations. One of the things that's talked about is making better use of public land in this delivery section. The government actually point to themselves and they say, we need to do this too, but also ask that local authorities consider how they can best make the most efficient use of their land. I believe that we do that. I've sat with members on the cabinet looking at business working, and I can see that this authority does squeeze its own land to gain the best benefit that we can for our community. I look at it and it says that they want to put the power to our local communities to shape the future. That's in their delivery section. I'm not sure that that's exactly what we're seeing elsewhere in this document, but I think it's important to reflect that that is said to be the aim of this document. That's what it's seeking to deliver. We also look at the idea of bringing in an innovation in delivery. Now, that innovation in delivery is an old concept. It's the idea of a development corporation. When I wrote my degree thesis, I wrote on the development corporation in Sheffield that brought about Meadowhall. That had many, many interesting challenges and was not wholly productive. So I'm interested to see that we're recycling an old idea of a development corporation as a brand new thing. It isn't, I'm afraid. We're looking at trying to deliver the right people with the right skills to make planning better. That's a really good idea. I think we probably will all sign up to that headline. We're talking about increasing funding for planning. You're right, Andrew, there has been a severe dearth in funding for planning at local authority levels over the last 10 years. We're looking at engaging with a changing culture, which is on the one hand, talking about enabling our community to shape their future, designing their place, but very firmly, laterally talks about more positive engagements with developers and landowners and bringing forward their needs. So very much a matter of balance within this delivery. They talk about the idea of increasing fees potentially on a national fee level. Obviously, our planning fees for development management are set at a national level. There's a dichotomy here though, guys, because they talk about this idea of being plan-led and moving the engagement to the front end of this process about how our development plan will lead the way forward. Now, our development plan is currently a free process. Nobody pays for that apart from our council taxpayers. They fund our plan-making process. There's also talk about delivering better enforcement. It's not clear really how that will be delivered as well. And it's said that we can charge higher fees potentially on a national setting, and that we might be able to capture some money from the national infrastructure process, whereby we can help to fund better planning. We can bring resources into planning. I like the sound of that, but I have to say that in both of those areas, there have been changes to Section 106 legislation that allow local authorities to bring in monitoring and control funding in any event. So I'm not seeing anything new. And my concern when I look through the elements of delivery that the government talk about in this white paper is they talk about a deep dive of planning legislation, having to rewrite the book, as it were, going through the case law. That will take many years. It will not be simple. It will not be delivered overnight. I cannot envisage that happening. And I wonder if those that are writing this white paper actually understand the level of challenge that they're facing. So finally, I think my closing on this is that the white paper does have some good ideas, but there are some significant question marks hanging over delivery. And I would ask that the government actually open up to some sort of consultation on the delivery of the white paper after they've made their decisions, because just right now, you can't respond on their matters of delivery. There are no questions in that section at all. We're left mute on that. We don't have direct questions to answer. But I assure you that Mark and I will definitively get back to them on those issues of delivery. So that's my short assessment of where we stand on delivery of the white paper and the questions that arise from it. I'll be happy to take your comments and questions, members. I've got Nigel Dixon.
Yes, thanks, Philip, for that. I was particularly interested in your point about charges and enforcement and things associated with that, because I just wonder if there is scope to have a different approach to the way in which charges arise and charges are levied. It seems to me that it has to be right that those developers that give rise to the greatest spend in terms of enforcement proceedings and so on and so forth should bear the cost of that, even to the point where people don't apply for planning permission or they apply retrospectively, let's put it that way, even those, I think there is scope to impose a charge in relation to that, because that will then discourage people from, you know, taking a flyer, from deliberately using the system in the way that it currently happens. So I kind of draw a parallel here with about enforcing the law. Those people who breach the law, who break the law, must expect to be held to account and to pay a cost, a proportionate cost. In this case, we're talking about planning laws, and rather than sort of criminal law or of that kind. But I think that those who create the problems should bear the cost of those problems. And so I think that there is scope to change that, so that that money, that revenue, which has to be raised in some way, shape or form, should come from those who are the root cause of it. And I really think that that's something that we should push hard on and say, you know, that is fair and equitable, and it ensures then that local authorities are more adequately resourced, proportionate to the enforcement effort that they have to make.
That sounds very positive, Nigel. I would agree, and I also extend that to plan making. If this white paper does bear fruit, and we are putting all of our engagement pretty much at the front end of the planning process, we're going to have to really roll that engagement out pretty significantly. And there's no means of paying for that at this moment in time. I think we need to have clarity around how this white paper is actually going to be funded. And it's just not there at the moment. There are some very positive statements about funding the planning process, but we need much, much more detail. And I suggest, as I say, a full and proper consultation about the delivery. Andrew.
Thank you, Philip. Yeah, I agree with Nigel about sort of cascading penalties sort of to the lower levels of the planning process. We of course recover costs on appeals that we win from the defaulting parties, so we do get some revenue in from that process. The point I wanted to make was that the white paper doesn't really address the issue of up to 1 million planning applications, or however many it is, which have been granted but not gone through to fruition and been built out. A lot of the heat could be taken out of this whole debate if we addressed that and we, in effect, accelerated these granted permissions to completion to reach this target that the government has plucked out of the air, it seems to me. Or at least if they've used census statistics, they're very much out of date and questionable. But if we are to reach between 330 and 337 thousand properties a year built to address the housing need, something's going to have to be done about the number of planning permissions which are just, you know, not implemented.
There's certainly in previous consideration about improving the planning system, Andrew, there was a lot of talk about how that might be delivered. This white paper is largely silent on it. It doesn't talk about how that might work. Mark, I know you've got some thoughts on that rump of permissions that are waiting to be implemented and actually the proportionality of where we are at the moment.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it the other day when we discussed it. I wouldn't get. I think it's very easy to say, oh, there's a million houses got planning permission. If you think about what that actually means, it's about 3 years supply at 300,000 houses a year. And the country is always going to have a number of planning consents which have not yet started or are in the process of being built out. So I don't think, you know, of those million houses which have got planning permission, I don't know the number, I imagine 900,000 of them will eventually get built, and they'll probably get built over the next 3 to 5 years. So the real evidence that Andrew's argument sort of relies upon is what proportion of permissions which are granted never get built at all. Not you know, do they take 10 or 15 years, but do they not get built at all? Government has tried in the past. You know, all planning permissions are subject to a 5-year implementation clause or a 3-year implementation clause. Of course, developers get creative and they start their development by digging a hole in the ground and then walking away and never doing anything else. So whether there's something that can be built into, you know, use it or lose it sort of principle. I quite liked, it didn't necessarily go down universally well, but our housing incentive scheme actually worked quite well because it included penalties and incentives. The developer could see some advantage in building quickly. Okay, we sacrificed some affordable housing, which was probably a bitter pill to swallow for some, but it did actually have the effect of progressing development at a faster rate than had previously been the case. So a combination of penalties and incentives, which gets the industry to get a move on when they've got their permissions, must be helpful. But the underlying point is, I think, you know, don't just rely on, you know, there's a million houses out there that could be built. That will always be the case. There will always be a delay between getting planning permission and somebody starting development on the site. Our role in the development industry, let's not overstate it, is actually quite small. You know, there's landowning interest to resolve, there's way leaves to sort out, there's development finance, there's hiring contractors. You know, a vast amount of work's got to be done in order to convert a planning permission into a building that somebody can live with. So that so there will always be delays in the system. If we can minimize those delays, then that's got to be a good thing. But I don't, as I said before, locally, I don't think there's much evidence of developers land banking sites. If you look at the conversion rate of our allocations into places that people can live in, it's pretty good outside of Fakenham, and Fakenham is slow for particular reasons, and we wouldn't anticipate somewhere like Fakenham to deliver that quickly anyway. So locally, I don't think there is an issue around land banking and developers, you know, specifically holding back on their consents.
Thank you, Mark. We're coming around to 11:10. I'd like to round up relatively quickly to allow you to move on today, members. Just a little bit of information about where this is moving next for Mark and I in terms of fielding this consultation. We'll be holding 2 events next week with the town and parish councils. On Wednesday evening, we've got a slot in around about 6:30, I think. And then on Thursday morning, we have a mid-morning slot to run something similar to the workshop that we've done with you as a group of members. So we'll consider the comments that come forward from the parish council, will publicise the changes that are occurring, and we'll consider those issues. What we will then aim to do is to prepare a draft set of answers to those questions and circulate those to portfolio holder and leader, and then we will look to answer these questions to the government, the MCH, GLG, well in hand, and ensure that when we have produced a final paper, that we will publish that on the council's website as a standing document that the wider community, the parishes and yourselves will be able to see. Andrew.
Can I just ask you, Philip, if we get responses which are positive, are we, from the towns and parishes, are we integrating those into our response, or will they be submitted separately but by us on behalf of towns and parish councils? And if responses are not supportive and are not, you know, sort of in tune with our response as an authority, will the town and parish councils be encouraged to submit those types of responses directly to the government, or will all colours of responses be included in our response to the government? I'm just trying to understand how we're going to process the responses.
I think it's really important that the district council's response is the district council's response. We can't be a voice for everybody out there. One of the things that we suggested at the outset with this consultation is that we wanted to raise awareness, and engagement with parish and town councils is certainly something that we will be recommending, that through NALC or directly themselves as parish councils, that they respond back to the MCHLG. I think it's really important that the government hears a diversity of voices on this and from as many parties as possible. So from my point of view, my expectation will be that we will be raising that awareness and encouraging the parishes to respond either via NALC directly or themselves. Okay, thank you, members. I think that closes. I know you've got a busy morning and Eric a busy afternoon by the sounds of it as well. So we'll wish you well and thank you very much for attending. Really appreciate your contributions over these last couple of workshops.
Thank you, Mark and Philip. Thank you.
Thank you.